Hello, welcome to a fantastic and very interesting episode of Outside the Studio. This is Tessa, your host. Very honored and have been looking forward to this conversation for a while to chat with Jess Cording. She's a registered dietitian, a health coach, and author of the book, The Farewell Tour, A Caregiver's Guide to Stress Management, Sane Nutrition, and Better Sleep, which is really an interesting topic and something I want to dive into heavily today. Jess, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm great. As we're talking, I was sharing it's New Year's resolution season in my field. So I've been busy with appointments and media stuff and just kind of getting into the swing of the new year.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something else. Yes, I can empathize with that. So many of us can, although by the time this episode comes out, we'll all be sick of our New Year's resolutions and probably having moved on to something else.
Yeah, cheers to that. I'm not a big resolution fan. So I'm like,
yeah. Tell me about that. Like, so in health coaching and wellness in your clients' experience, well, in your experience, really, when people come to you with, first of all, let me make this a two-part question. At the beginning of the year, I imagine that there's an influx of clients wanting to speak with you on resolutions, intentions for the year. Number one, is that true? And number two, how do you address it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like in the more recent media cycles, we're seeing people moving away from the classic New Year's resolutions. But that's in like very specific circles, right? We're always going to get the people that January comes and they want to hit the gym. They want to get super restrictive with their eating. I see that all the time. And I think what I tend to do is I'm kind of there as a support person, but ultimately I'm helping move people in more a direction of building sustainable, healthy habits, as opposed to making drastic short-term changes that really don't provide, in terms of longevity, don't offer much. So it's really about building healthy habits that can serve you well, as you move towards your goal, but as you maintain there and enjoy your life.
Yeah, I think you and I are similar in that. I'm also a health coach, and I often, even if it's not New Year's, intention setting time, I think about when people come to me with this goal, which is a noble goal. It's an admirable goal of wanting to change a lifetime of habits for something healthier, or something restrictive like losing weight, which doesn't have to be restrictive, but right. Oftentimes it is approached that way in my experience. I'm thinking about, just curious how you approach, let's say someone were to come to you with the intention of wanting to lose 20 pounds. How do you approach that?
Yeah. So, I'm a registered dietitian. I am also a certified health coach. I also happen to be a certified Pilates mat instructor. So I bring a little bit of everything to my work. I really take the time to ask a lot of questions and get to understand, what's going on in someone's life. Why are they wanting to make this goal? I think that's a huge piece of the picture, is understanding where the goal comes from. But I'm always keeping an ear out for, what someone already does well, because that gives us clues as to what to optimize. For areas where someone struggles or feels like something is challenging or unclear, I'm always wanting to help provide some clarity, some lightness, and, come up with workable solutions to address those goals. I think that it's not enough just to talk about just diet or just exercise. I think honestly, I have people I work with where the majority of what we talk about is their sleep or their stress management or how they are coping with emotions. I'm not a licensed mental health professional. I'll refer out when I feel someone needs that level of support, but it's really about taking a holistic approach to building healthy habits to support a goal. And it should feel doable. I always want someone to feel like they walk away with even at least one actionable thing they can start putting into practice. And that goes for, my patient and client work. That goes for the media work that I do, my books, my podcasts, my articles. I want people to find something applicable and approachable there.
Yeah, for sure. So important. I like you said earlier, for something like that to be sustainable. And I think it's oftentimes when we come in saying, when we go to anyone saying, I want to lose 20 pounds, it's so much more than just about losing the 20 pounds. And to make something like that sustainable really goes way deeper into emotional state, relationship state, sleep state. Yeah, it's really so much more nuanced than just diet and exercise. So I second that for sure. I'd love to switch gears and start talking about the book, The Farewell Tour. I want to hear about your experience writing this. I want to hear your experience about the role of caregiver, because it's such a noble and needed position to take in life and in career, and and how to, if we find ourselves in that role. I'm thinking specifically of something very personal to me that my family went through just before COVID hit in 2020. My grandmother passed away from dementia, Alzheimer's, and she was, in her later 90s. So it makes sense that something like that would develop later on in life. But watching my family go through the caregiver role, making the decisions for her end of life care, making the decisions for placing her in assisted living facility for a while, and then bringing her back to my parents' house for the remainder of her days, and being part of that whole experience really gives you a perspective about life, death, how we approach death, how we treat our elders, all of the emotions that come up for us as caregivers. And like you're talking about in your book, stress management for the caregiver, sane nutrition, and better sleep for the caregiver. So that's a lot. And I didn't ask a specific question, but I'll let you take it and run with it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, the caregiver role, so many of us don't choose it, right? We find ourselves there. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, because it's not something that you necessarily, if you are a professional caregiver, someone who your profession is caring for people who can't care for themselves, or who are, of advanced age or sick, maybe we could extend that to doctors, nurses. I know in some respects, my work as a dietitian is caregiving in a sense, but there is something about being a caregiver for a loved one where you're not in that professional role. You are the human, but you're also the caregiver. And there's a lot that comes up, in terms of physical health, mental health, emotional health. And it's interesting. I was 31 years old when my father was diagnosed with advanced inoperable pancreatic cancer. And I'd been a dietitian for maybe 5 or 6 years at that point. And I was working, I was working 7 days a week, but one of the jobs I was a dietitian for an ALS clinic. And I remember thinking, man, this is emotional, heavy lifting to work in this setting. And, I thought that I would be prepared if my own loved one ever were to become ill. And I learned very quickly that I was totally wrong. I had a lot to learn, and interestingly, I found that for myself, given my profession as a dietitian and health coach, some of the things like eating well, moving my body regularly, like that was not as challenging, because that's on some level things that I'm hardwired to prioritize. But I struggled a lot with sleep, so much. And I found that really impacted my immune system function, hormone function. I experienced some interesting, like new allergies and food sensitivities. And I was exhausted all the time. It was, I just was, it was like being a short fuse all the time too. It was just a really eye-opening experience. And, it depends on the diagnosis, right? Like some health conditions, there's some diagnoses, like there's hope for survival, right? Like you can kind of like, so I spend a lot of time in the oncology space and working in breast oncology. And, with breast cancer, it's a very high survival rate. So, the caregiver experience, while intense, it can be different in that, you have a different outcome or a different goal in mind, we'll say, kind of treating with a curative intent versus palliative, right? And, with my father, his doctors basically told us, well, to date, nobody has survived this, beyond this many years. And we didn't know how many months he might have. So it was kind of, on the one hand, we were giving it everything because we just wanted him to have a good experience. But we also had no idea how long that might be. And so it did help us keep quality of life in mind for him. But because it was, that high intensity of like, this is all we got, we don't know how much is left. We were all, my mother, my sister, and I, all burning the candle at both ends. And it definitely took its toll in different ways. So that's, just to scratch the surface, that's sort of how I became more attuned to the struggles of caregivers. I mean, previously, my patients in the ALS clinic, I saw the effects that their illness had on their loved ones and just the wear and tear, and I always wanted to be able to offer more support. So finding myself in a caregiver role sometime later was, it really highlighted for me that I also had a lot to learn.
Mm-hmm. So having gone through that experience, is there anything that you wish someone would have told you, that would have made things easier for you? Or do you wish you would have done anything differently?
Oh, sure. So practical things, I think asking for help would have been really helpful. I was, like I said, I was 31 years old. I say in the book that at that time in my life, I was kind of like the human embodiment of the Hallmark Channel, like career girl archetype in all those Christmas movies, like the one who's like super focused on her career and hates Christmas and never goes to her hometown. Like that was me, and I was living in New York. I was working, I was writing. And I remember at the time, like people would be like, oh, like Sex in the City. And I hadn't so much as like been on a date in a year at the time my dad was diagnosed. It was, that was the place I was in my life. That changed. I did find myself, and I have a whole section in the book about relationships, because that's a piece of wellness that I think gets swept under the rug a lot, and an area where I, was not in a great place in terms of my own well-being. And, I think I did have friends that I leaned on, but I don't think I reached out enough. And, one of the things that I did to kind of feel normal sometimes was I would spend time, I remember I was like trying to date, we'll say, and I just found myself in a situationship throughout the majority of my father's illness. And I look back sometimes and I'm like, why did I think I deserved that? Or why did I need to do that? But that ended when, he said he would try to swing by my father's wake. So that was how that ended. But I look back and I wonder, like, why did I think that was what I deserved as a caregiver? I think I was afraid to invest in myself emotionally because I was in such a raw, burned out state. And, I think if I could go back and tell my younger self something, I think it would be to take care of myself a little bit better emotionally. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. It's probably not what you were thinking. I mean, we could talk about sleep hygiene. If I knew then what I know now, I think that would have been a different experience. But the first thing that came to mind was just taking care of my emotional well-being a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I didn't really have any particular answer I was looking for, but I think it's it really hits close to home for me as I watch my parents now age in the same way that I watched my grandmother age. And thinking about as they get closer to their 80s, what's the next 15 to 20 years going to look like for them? They still live in a split level home. There's lots of stairs. They've been living in that house for decades. I mean, I grew up in that house that they still live in. So I'm not going to age myself here by telling you how long that has been, but it's, I think where my mind goes when I think about this kind of dynamic in relationship is the family nucleus and how this is such a layered conversation. So there's so many things. It is how we in this country in particular treat our elders, our parents when they age. And I always thought when I was a young kid that I came from this family that, and this isn't to demonize anyone, we're all human doing our best, but I thought when I was a kid that we came from this family that when our elders got older, we would wholeheartedly take them into our homes and, do our best to see them off into the end of their life and take care of them in our homes. And when it came time to make that decision for my grandma, my parents decided to put her in a home against her wishes. She did not want to go into a home. She actually asked my parents to take her in. And that really, for a period of time, drove a wedge between my mother and I, because it was my maternal grandmother. And it really disappointed me. And I remember, I'm going to be really candid here. I remember having this conversation with my mother when she was at this decision point and, being a little bit more immature than I am now and not having gone through that, I said to my mother, you are, by making this decision, teaching me how to treat you. It was like I was giving her an ultimatum. And I was pissed. I was like furious that we could put my grandmother in an assisted living home. And then I got some perspective about how much work it is to take care of somebody who has the kind of needs that my grandmother had. And one friend said to me, actually, Tessa, maybe the best thing for her is to be in assisted living where somebody can and is qualified to take care of her 24/7 can be. And so I'm sharing this with you because I went into this very judgmental. It kind of fractured my relationship with my mother for a long time. And I don't think it has to be that way for everyone at this precipice of making a decision. And I certainly don't want it to be that way when I go to make that decision for my parents and my father, between my sister and I. So I'm just curious, in your experience, having gone through this yourself, if there's a couple of things. It seems to me like this was my preconceived notion that there was this stigma against assisted living, like the demonization of assisted living homes and what that means. We're just throwing our elders away. We're throwing our ancestors away. And there was almost, when they did decide to bring my grandma home, there was this huge resistance to hiring outside help, like a registered nurse to come in and help bathe and change and, help my parents out, give them a break once in a while. They were very resistant to that. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on all of that? I said a lot, so I'm going to stop talking.
Thank you for sharing that with me. I watched so many families go through a version of that, and it's tricky. I think it's so individual. A few months before my father passed away, I lost my maternal grandfather to Alzheimer's dementia as well. And, I saw he had a very different experience from your grandmother in that his family kept him in his house, with around the clock care. And I saw the financial burden. I saw the emotional burden on the family of trying to meet his needs. And the dementia was so advanced by the time he passed, he didn't know he was in his own home. Mm-hmm. It was interesting. And, but I really, one thing I will say from having worked with populations where you kind of know when you're getting into it, what the outcome is, like, it's more like, how do I phrase this? Like with progressive illnesses or illnesses with a really poor prognosis, it does force the conversation of end of life decisions. And I think, I've seen, and this was, with my own family, I know that my mother and father, my dad was really specific about what he wanted. That was his personality also. But I think where I've seen people have better experiences is to have the conversations before you get to that point, right? To kind of be really have open dialogues about what you want, what you don't want. If it helps, get it in writing. I think that communication is really, really helpful, but I don't think there's one right approach. I think every person is so unique in what will truly benefit them. And I think at the end of the day, it really does come down to, fulfilling their wishes, but also doing what is going to give them the best quality of life. And I think you also have to think about what's realistic for a caregiver as well, too. Because, if someone is trying to care for, their 250-pound spouse, and yet they're like a 5-foot tall, like 100-pound little person, physically that's going to be very challenging and they're going to need help. Like that's just an example, that comes up sometimes, or for more complex medical issues where someone does require around the clock care. A lot of that is for their safety, and whether that is in their own home or in an assisted care facility, it's important to explore your options as well. And I the finances come up a lot, and I think, both options can be very expensive. And I think, taking advantage of resources that can help you understand your options can be really helpful, whether that's exploring insurance benefits or working with someone with an expertise in this area, like maybe a clinical social worker or someone who can offer some guidance, that can help reduce some of the overwhelm too. But I think big picture, have the conversations well in advance and really communicate, be really clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great advice. Well, so for anyone that hasn't picked up the book or hasn't heard it yet, The Farewell Tour, can you give us a little bit of I'm pretty sure people are kind of getting the gist of it, but I want to talk a little bit about music and the impact that you're writing and how it's interwoven throughout the book, The Farewell Tour. I want to talk about the title. So can we start a little bit with, in your words, what is the book about?
So as I shared earlier, when my family just turned our lives upside down to care for my dad, I needed a book like this. I remember looking for caregiver resources and books, and I couldn't find anything that spoke to me. Like, yes, there were a few titles out there, but everything I came across was so dry, and it was either kind of preachy and like made me feel like I was guilty. Like I felt guilty for being realistic about his prognosis as opposed to like blindly, hopeful. There wasn't a lot out there for people who were like younger caregivers or like, other family members. But I wanted something it sounds crazy, but I wanted something that would be entertaining. Like I needed that at that time, and I couldn't find it. The title actually comes from my dad. He worked in the music industry for his entire career. He started off hanging posters and ended up, eventually he did a stint at MTV for a while with program directing when they were just starting out. But then he ended up doing, for most of his career, promotions for a very long time at Columbia Records, Sony. Then he branched into doing, when he kind of semi-retired, doing management for established and emerging artists. So I grew up around that business. It was kind of, it's why I didn't go into the entertainment field, because it's just like when you see just it chews people up and spits them out, both the artists, the people that are supporting the artists. But it was a framework that our family understood, right? Like, kind of that vocabulary, that experience. And music was a huge part of growing up for me. It still is. But I remember I was at my dad's house one day, my parents' house. And because I was still living in the city, but I was going back and forth a lot, taking him to appointments and just hanging out with him and just we kind of did shifts. And one day I show up and he's on the phone. He's in his kitchen, rooting around for like an ice cream bar in the freezer. That was one of the few things he could eat for a long time. And I see him hang up and just kind of chuckle to himself. He had this really funny laugh, and he just looks at me. He goes, once they know you're dying, everybody wants a piece of you. So we started calling it the Farewell Tour. My dad and I shared a sense of like gallows humor, and that's kind of how we would cope with things. Like I he could always count on me to say all the wrong things he wanted to hear, basically. And it was kind of a joke for a while. I was like, oh, we're on the farewell tour. But the more I came to think about it, that caregiver journey is not that dissimilar from being on the road supporting a music artist, because maybe you have the other people in the band as well, but you've got your road crew. You've got the manager. I say my mom was kind of like the road manager because she was like the primary point person for everything. But then, my sister and I, we had our roles, our other family members, like, maybe I was craft services or like, I did a lot of like interpreting labs and helping with medications and, kind of interpreting what the doctor said, stuff like that. And just, being there, but you've got, lights, you've got soundboard mixing, you've got the people who have to frickin' drive the bus, so it's a lot of different roles to play. And, artists, like as an audience member, you see the little glimmer of their day that is like the performance, right, where they are on. But what you're not seeing is the early morning interviews that they have to get up for. You're not seeing the meet and greets before or after the show. You're not seeing the long drives or the flights between venues. And, most of the time, if someone goes to a city, like, they don't even get to explore. They see the concert venue and that's it, then it's on to the next place. So it's a very different experience than I think what a lot of people think about the music life. But yeah, I didn't. So the original book proposal didn't include music interviews. That actually came to me. A lot of this book came to me in dreams. But that particular aspect, I had a dream that I was at a party and saw one of my dad's artists across the room. And I woke up and so in the dream, I spoke with them. I was, chatting with them about my father, and it was just a nice feeling. And I remember I woke up and I said to my husband, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm about to make this project so much more complicated, but I have to follow this thread. And thankfully my publisher they were willing to let me to do this. So what I did was I reached out to a number of artists that my father worked with throughout his career. And I decided to interview them about life on the road, but specifically staying well or not on the road. So I asked them about physical well-being, emotional well-being, like different like remedies or things they've learned along the way, things they wish they had known when they were starting out. Really just kind of filling out that metaphor of the farewell tour, but with actual stories, and really just bringing something a little more beyond just talking about caregiving. Because I know when I was going through it, I wanted a break sometimes. And so they're kind of interspersed throughout the book to kind of break things up and, tie into the different themes, but in a different way. I also included a playlist in the book as well, which my father, music is my family's love language. And my father would always make, first it was like mixtapes. Now I'm dating myself, mixed CDs. But then, as time went on, playlists, that was a big thing. He would have a playlist for everything. And when he passed away, he had been very clear about what he wanted done with his social media. He was like, shut down my Facebook page. I don't want it to be an effing memorial. Shut down all the other stuff except Spotify. He wanted to leave his Spotify account active so we could listen to his stuff. So when I sat down to write the book, most of my big projects have a playlist that I listen to while I'm working on them. And for this one, I knew I wanted to make it all different songs that my father and I both were listening to during the 15 months of his illness. So I was looking at what he was listening to in 2017 and 2018. I was looking at what I was listening to, and I just took stuff that stood out to me that really made me think of that time. And I put it together in a playlist. Every chapter has at least one song. I'm a little embarrassed to admit I probably spent just as much energy working on the playlist as I did editing the book. I wanted it to be perfect. So, so there's music too. You can listen along or not, but that I knew that I wanted that to also be a part of it.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a good idea. Music is one of my family's love language too. I grew up with my dad playing the guitar, my mom singing. We would go to a friend's house and we would just jam, have music jam sessions.
I love that.
As a kid. And I remember just dancing around for like hours and hours and hours, just dancing to the music. So I'm with you on that. And the importance of playlists. Yeah, they're special. And there's nothing like music to get you in the flow of working on a very focused project like this. Can you share with us the title of the playlist?
Oh, so it's just called the Farewell Tour playlist. You can find it on Spotify. I think I actually created like a different account so people could find it too, but it's the Farewell Tour playlist. I'm happy to share the link to make it easier to find.
Yeah,
I think it's the Farewell Tour book playlist.
Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure that gets in our show notes so people can easily find it and follow along for sure. I wanted to go back on something that you said a little bit earlier when you were interviewing the musicians that your father worked with. I was curious if there was any kind of resounding answers about wellness or any sort of resounding themes. It doesn't have to just be about wellness, but could be themes in general that you were surprised by that came up over and over again.
So this one was not a surprise, but I think it might surprise some people. And that was the majority of the artists I spoke to, expressed that alcohol was not helpful. Either they were not drinkers to begin with, or they stopped drinking after a time. I think there were 2 people I interviewed who had like a healthy relationship with alcohol, which is the rarity, to be totally honest. But I think big picture, it was like being really careful with substances, drugs and alcohol. Definitely those, I think sometimes people who have like an idea of the rock and roll lifestyle, find that, that in reality, if you want to be successful in that field, you really can't be a big drinker or be really into drugs, at least for the long haul. Another thing that came up obviously was sleep. A few themes that came up were how to get restful sleep when you're just in these different like hotel rooms every night. Elvis Costello had some really good sleep tips in his chapter. I also got some interesting tips about taking care of your vocal cords or your voice. So things like rest, different, concoctions that you can use. But I think resounding themes, it was, taking care of your instrument, being careful with substances, and just making the most of the sleep that you can get. Those are some of the big themes that came up.
Yeah, interesting. How cool. What a great idea. I'm glad that you had this dream. And speaking of dreams, I think it's such a powerful tool. I've heard stories of many authors using their dreams for fodder for writing. And so I was curious to hear a little bit more about that process for you, in terms of the process of remembering, capturing dream. Is it something like keeping a journal by your bed, or is it something that easily comes back to you when you go to sit down to write, or something altogether different or in between?
Such a juicy question. I love that. I've been having vivid dreams my entire life. I had no idea that was weird until I was much older. Like, it's just never been, I never questioned it. I just assumed everybody has wacky dreams every night with very clear things. And I get a lot of messages in dreams in general. And that's always fascinating to me because like 99.9% of the time that I'm told to do something in a dream or something is shown to me, like it's exactly what I needed to hear or see or be, directed to do. But there's a different feel from like which dreams are actual messages and which ones are just like, chatter from the day or anxiety dreams. Like there's a very different energy. And I don't have vocabulary to explain it. It's just more a feeling, just a knowing. And I find that the dreams that are messages, they just hit differently. I don't know. They're more clear. And there's also a sense of, I don't know, not always calm, but just trust, I would say. I've been keeping a dream journal probably since I was like 13. I'm not as like regimented. Like I don't have a designated dream journal anymore. And I used to do all the looking up the symbols. And, I'm in a place now where I kind of know if I dream about a certain thing, like this is what it might mean to me, or different symbols that have come up for me. I kind of think about, well, what's my connection to that? And that's sort of my approach to dream analysis these days. But yeah, I journal every day, usually a little bit in the morning and then a little bit before bed. So morning time is when I might write down a dream I had, or if I am really busy with patients, I might do it like in the afternoon if I get a minute just to jot down a few things that I remember. But I do find that the dreams come back pretty easily for whatever reason, especially if there's something that has like a little nugget of info that I need.
Yeah, I think dreams are so fascinating. And I've mostly in my early 20s would have a similar experience where the dream would be vivid, so vivid. Oftentimes I'd wake up and I would literally sit up kind of out of breath and be like, I have to write this down. This was a clear message. It felt so, and you're right. It's a felt sense. It was for me too, that it was so meaningful that I needed to capture it in writing. And then it often would turn into a story. I just love that. If anyone's interested in, accessing dreams in way of interpretation or using your dreams in terms of making sense of things, there's a great book by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, and I think I want to say it's called A Beginner's Guide to Dream Interpretation. It's short. I'll make sure that link gets in the show notes. So last topic I want to touch on, as you are a registered dietitian and there's so many different diet theory out there. I feel like every few months or so, there's this new fad or craze. Jess is like nodding her head and kind of chuckling. How sugar is the demon. I once read that sweet potatoes and quinoa are terrible for you. I mean, there's all of this stuff out there that, I don't know, it's probably meant to grab headlines and make money, but It's almost like we've gotten to the point, at least I have in terms of my health coaching, that people feel like, I don't know who to trust. I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start with this diet theory. So I was hoping you could, I don't know, just talk a little bit about that and your experience and your thoughts around that.
So the things that I focus on primarily, blood sugar balance, I think that is huge. And by that, I mean having a balance of protein, fat, and fiber, protein, fat, and complex carbohydrates spread consistently through the day. Blood sugar, we're most conditioned to think about it in terms of diabetes and diabetes risk reduction, but really it's important for everything. When your blood sugar is not well controlled, your appetite is all over the place, your mood and anxiety might be all over the place, or your feelings of anxiety. It can impact hormone function. And it also plays a role in stress response, inflammation. And we know that inflammation is a root cause of so many different health conditions. We've also had, high blood sugar levels been linked to things like Alzheimer's disease, can play a role in heart health. So almost like you name it, blood sugar plays a role. So that's a huge piece of the picture. So I'm always trying to help people feel like they can more easily eat in a way to support balanced blood sugar. So there's a lot about that in the book, in the nutrition section. Gut health, that also plays a role. I think in the last few years, we've seen more attention in this area. I feel like more people are open to the idea that what's going on in our gastrointestinal system impacts our overall well-being. That's where most of our immune system function happens. There's different mood regulating neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut. So there's a lot now we're seeing about gut brain communication and the way that the state of our gut health, our gut microbiome, the environment in there can play a role in our mental health as well. So there's a lot of factors. But really, from a research standpoint, when we look at, the quote unquote best diets, like again and again, the Mediterranean diet is at the top, and I think some of the reasons that this particular style of eating has been shown to be so health promoting is that you're getting lots and lots of vegetables, and fruit has its place too, but generally speaking, fruits, vegetables, you're getting vitamins and minerals, but you're also getting lots of powerful antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds. You're getting fiber, which is really helpful for digestion, balancing hormones, regulating blood sugar, and by extension, the different roles that those things play in reducing disease risk. And then some of the other aspects of the Mediterranean diet, promoting healthy fats like olive oil, nuts and seeds, oily fish. And another big one too is, and I know like all the like the paleo folks or the keto, they're going to be like, oh my gosh. But again and again, like when you look at the research, having high intake of red meat and processed meat, or really high intake of red meat and even like moderate intake of processed meat, like again and again, we see that has been associated with increased risk of many different adverse health conditions, heart health, certain cancers, even diabetes, brain, like cognitive issues. So I'm not saying that, the research says never eat steak or, you can never, ever have bacon. But I think it's really about, limiting those foods to special occasions and choosing thoughtfully. Sugar, I get a lot of questions about sugar. And again, sugar, I would say, is one of those special occasion things. I'm a big fan of taking an 85-15 approach to healthy eating, where, the majority of what you're eating is healthy, nourishing foods that then there's a little room for pleasure, but I would be, when it comes to added sugar, I do tend to encourage, weeding it out of the stuff where it doesn't really need to be, like yogurts and condiments and wholesome sounding cereals. Traditional Mediterranean diet is also, you're getting a lot of other fiber rich foods like beans, lentils, whole grains. I think there's a lot of discrepancy, or a lot of debate, we'll say, over grains and like, are they good? Are they bad? And I think it really depends on the individual and, what grain, how are they tolerating it? And I think it's really important to, take that approach of bio-individuality. And, we can look at what's in the literature, but I think at the end of the day, it really matters what works for your body. Like some people are anti-dairy and say that everyone should avoid it. Others are like, well, some types of dairy might be okay. Some might not be. But at the end of the day, it's like, how does it make you feel? What's your experience? So I hope that at least partially answers your question, because to your point, there is so much ground that we could cover, but I think it's really important to take an individual approach and, be aware of some of the things that are important, but not to make yourself so crazy about it that you end up diminishing your mental health in that process.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I haven't done much digging into Mediterranean diet, and I know it is a popular one. My understanding, the basics, I think of this diet are, like you said, vegetables, healthy fats like olive oils, nuts, and salmon, and legumes. Am I missing any of the staples?
Yeah, I mean, those are some of the basics. It's traditional Mediterranean diet. Fish is kind of like a big animal protein, maybe some small amounts of poultry, eggs, a little bit of dairy, but very low in red meat, minimal processed meat, if any, low in sugar. And again, like, I don't know, I'm obsessed with olive oil. So I'm like always like just reminding people, like, use olive oil. It's your primary cooking oil. It's the heart healthy monounsaturated fats that help raise the good cholesterol, lower the bad cholesterol. And the more we learn about olive oil, the more we uncover all these different incredible antioxidant compounds like oleocanthal. And I could go on and on about olive oil, but that's like very that's traditional Mediterranean diet. And for folks who don't like olive oil, avocado oil is great. It's got a more neutral flavor. High smoke point, same heart healthy fats, but without the olive oil taste that I know some people find off-putting, or if you're just making a recipe where you don't want that olive oil taste.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. The one term I wanted to define, because I've gotten this question before from clients, is what do we mean when we say processed meat and processed food?
Yeah, so processed meat, that is things like bacon, sausage, cured and smoked meats and fish, hot dogs, deli meat. So that's what would be under that processed meat category. The question of processed foods, that's a really good one, because, we have processed foods, but then we have ultra processed foods. So processed foods are not necessarily inherently bad. And by that, what I mean is that, things that are healthy may be processed. So like oats are technically processed because they have to go through processing to become that shape, that you cook. You don't just pick the oat off the stalk and start eating it. Yogurt is a processed food. And we know that fermented dairy, for people who tolerate dairy, may have some health benefits. But like a granola bar that you're buying in the store that's got emulsifiers and added sugar and preservatives, like that's more on the ultra processed side. Or, if there are foods that need to be made in a factory, like if it's not something that you can make in your own kitchen, those are more likely to be ultra processed foods. And those are the ones that have been associated with adverse health impact.
Yeah, thank you. That's a question that I feel like for me, it's easy to think, oh, well, I eat close to the earth. If it's a sweet potato, I know it grew in the earth. I can pull it out of the earth. It's a whole food, right? I can see it and I can cook it in that form. I don't have to change it. There's no alchemy involved except for the cooking of the sweet potato to make it digestible to me. But there is no factory involved. Sorry, one more term I wanted to have you define is emulsifier. Why is it bad?
Oh, so again, there's different degrees. But the emulsifiers are really to give food like a specific texture, right? And I think that anytime that you're adding different substances to a food to how do I phrase this without like putting people to sleep? But it's just kind of under that umbrella of things that are not really offering you any health benefit. Like best case scenario, they're just not doing anything for you. Worst case scenario, potentially maybe causing some digestive disruption or, impacting just the way that you tolerate a food. And I think that there's a number of substances that get added to foods, because they're meant to be like making them more like palatable and tolerable. And there's people who get paid big money to make foods like more irresistible. That's more in the snack food category. Like you'll see emulsifiers in so many different products. And I don't think that they need to be completely demonized. Because people are going to go to the store and be like, oh my gosh, there's emulsifiers in my almond milk. Oh my God. So it's a lot of it is really about how much of your diet is incorporating those different foods. If everything that you're eating is a food that is containing, emulsifiers, chances are it's got a lot of other processed ingredients that are not doing you favors, and that overall your diet quality may be lacking in some respects, because you might be missing out on some really good stuff if you're primarily eating these packaged things. So it's not like a run for the hills kind of situation, but it really depends on the type, the frequency, the amount.
Yeah. Perfect. I love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate. See, I think these terms get kind of thrown around and we feel like we think we know what people say when they mean processed or emulsified or even preservative. And oftentimes we don't check to understand, is that something I need to be terrified of? Or do I need to just make sure 85% of the time I'm eating whole foods, I'm eating fruits and vegetables, I'm eating, things that came from the earth and are not processed and they don't have additives to them. They're like an actual whole food. 15% of the time I can indulge and not worry about it. So really appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see I could just keep talking to you forever about diet, nutrition, music, caregiving, all of these things. But I guess what I'm wondering if there's anything, that you hope, let's make it a two-part question. Is there anything that you really hope people take away from the book, The Farewell Tour? And is there any last thing that you wanted to highlight from our conversation today?
Well, what I really hope that people will take away from it is, feeling that they are seen and supported, and that even small things can make a difference. I think that the caregiver journey can be really lonely, and it's very easy to get caught up in feeling like you're not doing enough. And, my hope is that people will read the book and maybe find, even if it's just one or two things that they can do that day to improve their quality of life and help them feel like they are, because when you take care of yourself, you can better take care of others. And I think that's really important. Self-care is not selfish. And just kind of, one last thing that I would add would just be to give yourself permission to do what you can. There's always going to be more on the list. And I think there's a lot of power in small changes. and in doing the things that are within your power. So I hope that that's helpful. And I hope that if people check out the book, I hope that they find it useful.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I love this topic. And I guess one final administrative question that I always like to ask is, where can people go to connect with you and find out more?
Yeah, so you can find me on my website, jessicacordingnutrition.com. I'm also on all the social media platforms. I'm probably most active on Instagram, just at Jess Cording, but you can also find me on Twitter and TikTok. I feel like I'm too old for TikTok, but I am on there at Jess Cording. Facebook, Jessica Cording Nutrition. I also run the Drama-Free Healthy Living podcast, so you can listen there. But if you just want to stay in the loop, you can visit my website, sign up for my newsletter. I send about 2 out every month, just sharing different, different articles, resources, recipes. And I'd love to see you there.
Thank you so much, Jess. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and speaking with you today. I really appreciate your time.
And thank you so much for having me. And I love getting to meet your cat too.
She's such a little starlet.
They
are on the ground right now.
I love it. Mine do the same thing. It's like, it keeps things interesting.
Yeah, right? Life would be this Zoom culture that we now find ourselves in. We got to have some kind of entertainment. And this is one of the best forms of medicine for me. Well, everyone, that concludes another amazing episode of Outside the Studio. I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope you learned something new, maybe remembered something old, maybe felt inspired to apply something to your life. You can hear my dog in the background. She's doing a little happy dance. So Daisy enjoyed it. Anyhow, I wanted to just pop in here to wrap us up to say a couple of things. Number one, I have such an amazing team that helps me put these podcasts together. Without them, I wouldn't be able to bring these amazing conversations to you. So thank you to my producer, my director of creative services, my sound editor, my engineer, Consistency Media. Don't know what I would do without you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And the amazing creation and artistic musical genius, Drew Lovern. Thank you so much for putting together this music specifically for Outside the Studio. So unique to the show, only place you're ever going to hear it is right here. Thanks, you guys. You make my world go round. Stay well, everyone. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, share on the socials, especially if it's a show that you think, hey, this could help somebody else. That's what this is all about, right? We're sharing information so that we're better, so that we're inspired, so that we're lifting each other up, and we're learning how to be in this world, living on this planet to the best of our ability, sharing information and inspiring one another. And that's my hope. That's my hope for the show. Take care.